I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And this is our podcast on Back to the Future, which was a series of 3 films released in 1985, 1989 and 1990. Well, there's an animated series in 1991 to 2 we might mention briefly at the end. I remember posters for Back to the Future 2 and 3 when it was in the cinema, appearing outside supermarkets and so on. And our mother used to go around saying, it looks like ridiculous nonsense. Utter nonsense. Stupid films they make. And I got it into my head because of this, that it must have aliens in it, because everything our mother usually said was stupid nonsense had aliens in it. And in later years we've come to realise you can make perfectly good things with aliens in them, but Back to the Future is not, in fact, one of them. So, when I was first shown Back to the Future on video, which I guess was in early 1993, and I'll tell you why I think it was that particular year in a bit, I came in with the idea of, I'm not supposed to like this, am I? Full of aliens. But how wrong I was. Now, I was shown it on a video recorded off the telly by the person who introduced Rosie to Watership Down and his 2 brothers, who were the 3 boys down the road. And they made the terrible mistake. They probably hadn't done it on purpose, really. They claimed to have done it on purpose because the first 15 minutes of the film were boring.
I always believed that they would do a thing like that because they did think they were boring.
But what they'd done was bring in the recording when, and here you hopefully have some knowledge of the film because I'm not going to sit and go through all the plot and everything. They brought it in where Marty, Michael J. Fox, the main character, arrives at Twin Pines Mall with his skateboard and video camera and comes across Doc's van and the time machine comes out of it. And when the time machine was coming out of it in the clouds of steam sort of thing, I was thinking, aliens are going to come out of it. It's not going to be any good. And how surprised I was when Christopher Lloyd emerged dressed as your typical wild-eyed scientist character, and I discovered the film wasn't about aliens at all, but was a very good, very fun, very engaging time travel movie not involving aliens at all. It's all set in Hill Valley, California.
Did you then borrow the video and show it to me? Because I'm sure that's the first version I saw, the one with the first 15 minutes not on it.
Yes, they were always very keen to lend us videos. Very kind of them, like they did with Watership Down.
And I've always wished I had seen it all the way through, because I would like to know what it's like to meet George, Biff and Lorraine in 1985 before we see them in 1955.
As soon as we recorded it off telly ourselves, sometime during 1993, so when we were 8 and 10 or approaching 8, we both realised, the first 20 minutes or whatever it was that was missing, I think it's about 18 really, aren't boring and pointless at all. They actually contain a lot of things you need to know and a lot of comparing bits between sort of history repeating itself bits between 1985 and 1955 that really add a whole new dimension to the film that we didn't have just watching it from the Twin Pines Mall parking lot bit. So what a mistake the boys had made.
I'm not being rude, but they were the sort of boys who wouldn't really care about depth and plot importance and would just want to see the time travel and the running round and disappearing and stuff.
So I guess they were happy with that version. But they also had 2 and 3, Back to the Future 2 and 3 on video shopboard video. So they were whole, and they'd watched those with me and lent us those to watch as well. But we recorded them off the telly during the course of 1993 as they came on, and Back to the Future 3 actually premiered on Christmas Day 1993 for the first time on network television. I always remember what year it was. That was terribly exciting on Christmas Day afternoon, settling down to watch and record Back to the Future 3. You think of the quality of Christmas television nowadays. It's like a utopia of Christmas TV fun. Back to the Future 3 premiere on Christmas Day. We nearly didn't make it back in time for it, but we had to take our stupid grandparents for a walk and almost got lost.
I don't remember that.
But fortunately, I found the way back, and we did make it back in time. But since then, we've watched Back to the Future 1, 2 and 3 many, many times on the videos we had, and then later on the DVD box set, which I was given one birthday, and goodness me, we've enjoyed it every time. Back to the Future itself is an extremely good movie. One thing that annoys me sometimes when trying to talk about Back to the Future to some people is if you get bogged down in whether the time travel makes sense.
No time travel makes sense.
Yeah, it's all sci-fi, and arguing about whether different ideas about time travel make more sense than others is absolutely futile and ridiculous.
We didn't get round to making that point about Jurassic Park, did we? People going, oh, you can't really make dinosaurs out of old mosquitoes, but it doesn't matter because it's a film.
Yeah, personally, I do prefer, as an art form, time travel where you can have some element of messing about in the past, or indeed the future, and changing timelines, as opposed to something like Crime Traveller, where nothing you do will affect the timelines and it's all complete predestination. And I do like a mix of the two as well, where you're not quite sure how much is predestined and how much isn't.
Like Goodnight Sweetheart.
Indeed, and Doctor Who does that quite a lot. Not that I like Doctor Who very much. And even Quantum Leap has gone in that direction at times. I'm sure we'll podcast about that.
I don't think it meant to, but we can have that debate at the time, can't we? If indeed it will be a debate.
But yes, I do like a good mix, but probably because Back to the Future was my first time travel thing, really, that I engaged with. I do like you can mess about and change timelines all you want, and no matter how many paradoxes it creates, you can still be alive, and the timelines will resettle themselves, and you can have time anomalies like old Biff from 2015 that are still there, and you can just mess about and do what you want with it, because it's good for storytelling and fun to watch.
Yes, I agree with you, actually. I do think when we were very young and silly, we did have a bit of a debate about which one made more sense. So I've grown up thinking you thought that being able to change things did make more sense. But obviously I was wrong about that. It's just that it's better for engaging with stories and characters than actually you're right about that.
Yes, that really struck me and annoyed me when we watched Crime Traveller on the BBC in 1997, wasn't it? And you couldn't do anything with the timelines, and you think, well, what is the point then? The point is, by doing it, you've made what's already happened, and I didn't like that as an art form myself. So yeah, Back to the Future, you can mess about and do what you want. Now, the first film, as I was saying, is an excellent film, and I have come to think over the past few years that much as I've always loved and appreciated the three films as a trilogy, and I still do, I've come to think that I actually prefer the first film itself as a standalone film, which it was originally planned to be, and it took 4 years to get round to filming the back-to-back sequels after the success of the film. And inevitably, when you come back and do sequels, it is going to undermine certain things from the first film in certain ways. And yes, the first film still has a lot of value as the beginning of a trilogy and of a franchise, but I think its greatest value might be as a film in itself.
Yes, I do agree with you. The other two films are extremely worth watching and very fun. I think you agree with me about that too. You sort of just want to forget that they're going to happen when you're watching the first one, I suppose.
That's it, isn't it? What really gets me is the whole aspect of Doc at the end with the taped up notes. Well, I figured, what the hell? Which is absolutely fantastic bit of cinema. And then when you watch Back to the Future 3 and you see Marty again being back in 1955 and spending another week with 1955 Doc, so you spend a fortnight with them all together, you think, well, I'm not surprised Doc would figure, what the hell, I might as well take this note back together. After all that, he's already discovered he's going to end up back in 1885 getting shot and so on. And then he tapes a note back together and he's like, oh, I'm going to get shot in 1985 as well. It makes it all rather convoluted and not so nice, and takes away some of the resonance if you think back to, well, I figured, what the hell? That's got to be a direct result of the end of Back to the Future, the first film, really, rather than the Marty Doc 55 interaction in Back to the Future 3.
Yes, although when you're little, you don't really think about that, do you?
No, not at all.
Perhaps now is a good time to say that I always used to say Back to the Future 2 was my favourite, and it was. I've changed my mind since I've grown up and I've realised the first one is the best in my opinion. But the reason it used to be 2 is that they do such a lot of time travel. They travel into the future, 2015, which was last year.
Yes, not the future anymore. It's scary.
And then they travel to alternate 1985 where everything is crap, so then they have to go and sort it out back in 1955, and they keep on using the time machine and having adventures in time. And that was what I wanted to see when I was a young child.
Definitely. As the younger audience, I'm sure a lot of us would have enjoyed that second one the most, and in many ways it is the most entertaining. You like a sort of roaring, time travel, exhilarating ride. And certainly I think 2 is the main inspiration for the animated series. What made the people who decide what Back to the Future is going to be made say, oh, look at Back to the Future 2. You could make a cartoon series about that sort of time travel. That's reminded me that it always did strike me that the plot of Back to the Future 3 is really exactly the same as the plot of Back to the Future, the original. And in many ways that's paying homage, isn't it?
That always felt very deliberate to me. It was being stuck in a time period and needing to obtain the means to make the time machine work to escape. And each time it's a different kind of a problem. In 1955, they don't have any plutonium to power the time circuits and the flux capacitor, so they have to have the lightning strike thing, which I'm sure you know all about. And in Back to the Future 3, they're in 1885. And Marty's saying we're going to have to get some gas, which is very funny because there isn't any. So they can't drive the DeLorean up to 88 miles per hour, so they have to do it with the train sort of thing. And it's a different kind of problem, but the same sort of plot and the different setting and everything for me always made it different enough.
You can see that they're aware that it's pretty much the same film, where they have things in 3 coming back to 1 that we haven't revisited in 2. It's Clara, cover the DeLorean, same as It's Your Mom, cover the time machine, and they've made the model of how they're going to, or Doc has made the model of how they're going to get back to the future in both 1 and 3, so yes, it certainly works as a piece of homage, and yes, it does feel, of course, very different having it in the Wild West, very unlike any version of Hill Valley we've seen before. Obviously 1955 Hill Valley and 1985 Hill Valley, both versions, and 2015 Hill Valley are all incredibly noticeably different from each other, but you can really tell that they're the same place in different eras and have the same sort of feel and the same sort of characters, whereas 1885 very, very different world, very, very different type of film, with enough stuff to ground it in. Yes, this is Hill Valley, such as the clock tower and the bar, the saloon, and the presence of Buford, Mad Dog Tannen, and so on.
And the clock tower's getting built, of course. I always thought that was really cool. It had been such a huge big deal in the first film and the second film as well, to an extent. So I thought that was very good. But there were actually a couple of years where I thought Back to the Future 3 was a bit boring by comparison. I always found 1955 very engaging. I don't know why. I found it more engaging than 1885. It was certainly a lot more colourful, and I think I found it more relatable with Biff's car and stuff more than going around on horses. So I always did like that one, but there was a time when I thought Back to the Future 3 was a little bit boring. But then when I realised I did like it, I also discovered I quite like Calamity Jane, so I had a phase of saying, oh yes, I like westerns, I really like westerns. But they're not proper westerns, are they? And when I watched a proper western, I was really bored by it. But one thing Back to the Future 3 does do is pay homage to westerns and have some anachronistic humour, with Clint Eastwood being Marty's alias and stuff like that. And I wasn't really familiar with westerns, so perhaps that's why I didn't find it super interesting. But actually, it's got very much the same sort of humour humour and tone and adventure as the other Back to the Future films. So very quickly I realised I did like it.
Everybody everywhere is going to say Clint Eastwood is the biggest yellow belly in the West, or that kind of thing. Very funny, very knowing. And as I was saying earlier, this is why it really, really works as a trilogy, because it's come back and said, right, here are the two sequel films, they're going to go like this, and it's taken the original into account and used it really well and recreated bits really well and made links here and there really well. And it's very easy to come back to a very good, very popular film and plan two sequels off it for a trilogy and completely miss the mark and include lines and bits of homage that you think are going to work and just fall completely flat, and you think, God, only the first film's worth watching. I'm thinking Pirates of the Caribbean there.
So I was wondering what you were thinking of.
So it's much easier to do that than to do what Back to the Future did and come back and make two sequels and make a proper, coherent, satisfying trilogy. So they certainly did that with Back to the Future.
You should tell everyone your interesting factoid now about making the sequels and how it was supposed to be one film.
Oh yeah, well, originally it was supposed to be one film.
Alright.
One sequel called Back to the Future Paradox or something like that.
It's a silly name.
Yes, and then someone realised, well, wouldn't it be good to make this Marty stuck in 1955 again, the cliffhanger, and then do a whole kind of western as Back to the Future 3? And goodness me, what a good idea that was.
And there's such a lot of content in the story. It would have been a very long film.
Yes, I think the start point for deciding that was it was going to be too long. But you can see that it really is written as one film. And things that are introduced at the beginning of the film, Nobody Calls Me Chicken, the automobile accident that is introduced to us in Back to the Future 2, we have to wait till the very end of Back to the Future 3 to see that and how it changes from how it was originally going to go. I say originally, how it was going to go after Marty had first gone back to 1955 to change that timeline. So when you watch Back to the Future 3, they know that you know Back to the Future 2, and in many ways it does all feel like one long film. Jennifer on the porch goes back to her at the end of Back to the Future 3. Marty and Doc in 1885 are discussing it quite freely. Oh yes, Jennifer's there on the porch. And, well, we wouldn't know what they were talking about if we hadn't watched Back to the Future 2. So there are signs there that it is written as one long story. It's not surprising to find out that it was originally going to be one film. Of course, yes, it's all filmed back to back during sort of 88 and 89, and released in 89 and 90.
I think it's quite interesting, and I didn't really think of this until I'd seen it a few times, that actors don't start playing different members of the same family until Back to the Future 2. They just play the same characters, older or younger, which shows how they're taking the whole concept to a different level, in a way making it a bit more sort of surreal than it was originally. Obviously, time travel is quite surreal, but people in families are never as similar as when they're being played by the same actor on television, are they? So I do think it gave it a different level of tongue-in-cheek and going, well, we know it's not really realistic, don't we?
You're absolutely right about that, and of course people would like to point out, well, Maggie McFly and Lorraine Baines McFly, both played by Lee Thompson, of course can't actually be blood related. They've both married into the McFly family at different times. But then you say that to the makers, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, and they say, oh yes, well, the McFly men are attracted to women who look like Lee Thompson. Quite tongue-in-cheek.
Yes, the poor creators are get faced with all sorts of stupid questions, some of them about the logistics of time travel, and they basically say, well, we figured it could work this way and it's fine because it's a movie. And they're right about that. And also, oh, can I buy the high-tech stuff from 2015? Well, no, you can't, because we made it up to be futuristic.
Yes,
Poor blokes.
they haven't got the fine sci-fi, have they? Talking about sequels and how they work or don't work, we have Crispin Glover to thank, don't we, for the fact that the two sequels turned out the way they did, and contain the things they contain, because they were written that way after Crispin Glover, declined to return for the sequels. And apparently, one can read this in all sorts of places, when they thought they were going to have George and Lorraine, both Marty's parents, on board for the sequel, there was going to be another point in time where Marty went back there and accidentally split them up and had to get them back together again. And that would have been rather disappointing, wouldn't it? Because it would have been even more the first film again, much more than Back to the Future 3, as it turned out.
Yes, it was a blessing in disguise. It sounded like a load of rubbish when you told me you found that out. And they wouldn't have had all that alternate 1985. And I remember watching Back to the Future too, where they go to 2015 and sort things out, and they go back to 1985, and it's all terrible. And Lorraine is married to Biff, and he's turned the clock tower into Biff's Palace Casino sort of thing. I remember thinking, what the hell is going on? And I wanted to know, and I thought, well, if I keep watching the film, then I'll find out, won't I?
It works really well, that, doesn't it? It's reminded me, poor old Mark, Jimmy Olsen McClure, they cut his scene as Dave McFly from that bit.
I remember discussing that with you when we watched the deleted scenes and saying, well, maybe they thought it would be better if Marty didn't see anyone from his family when he's freaking out about why things are so different.
That's true, but it does lend more weight if you keep the Dave scene in to Marty saying, why can't anybody give me a straight answer? Where is my father? Where is Joyce McFly?
That's
and you
right.
think, oh, he hasn't really asked anyone, but he had, in fact, mentioned it to Dave earlier.
Where's Dad? What the hell is wrong with you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is a good scene. I can see why they cut it, but equally, perhaps even more so, it would have been good to keep it in.
But it was wise to remove, while we're on the subject, Buford murders Marshall Strickland from Back to the Future 3, which, as the filmmakers so rightly say, is too bleak and extreme and really takes Buford to the worst level he's ever been at, and you'd find it harder to laugh at him later for getting the number 7 and so on.
Yes, two good reasons. Nobody dies in Back to the Future, or at least they don't stay dead. I remember them saying on the commentary. And the other thing they said was, why would you not want to see Marty shoot him? Dead, kind of thing.
Yes!
Which is what you said.
That's it, isn't it? You think, oh, he deserves more than being hit with the metal thing and then dumped in the manure.
And I made a comment about Buford that you found very interesting, didn't you? He's Biff's ancestor, as you probably know.
Yes, he's Biff's great-grandfather.
And I said he is both more dangerous and more comical than Biff. So you're kind of more frightened by him, but also more amused by him, so they kind of balance each other out in a way as to how much you engage with him and what you want to see him do.
Yes, and he very much fits into the environment of Back to the Future 3. It's a lot more wild, more dangerous, but a lot more far removed from the established universe we've seen already, so Buford can afford to be more surreal in that way.
I like the bit where he's being a jerk and Marty comes and he says, hey, lighten up, jerk, and nobody's got a clue what he's talking about, and Buford looks at his gang like, what? And they're like, we don't know, and he goes, mighty strong words, Runt.
Absolutely brilliant work from Thomas F. Wilson there.
Shall we talk about Thomas F. Wilson now?
Yes, and then perhaps the rest of the cast.
Thomas F. Wilson does such a lot for Back to the Future, doesn't he? In Back to the Future 2 in particular, there aren't very many scenes that he's not in as Biff, some age, or some relative of Biff.
Yes, that's right. He plays 18-year-old Biff, 2 versions of 48-year-old Biff, and 78-year-old Biff, and 18-year-old Griff. Often 2 of those in one scene at a time. He's definitely the hardest working actor on Back to the Future 2. But in Back to the Future, if you just had the script and read it dry, which people must have done at some point, you wouldn't necessarily think that Biff was going to be a huge player in the wider time travel adventure. He's there to do his job as the bully and make George's life hell and crack on to Lorraine and then he gets put in his place eventually in the end. But they expand all that so much into, I mean, you wouldn't know originally that Biff was desperate to have Lorraine and marry Lorraine. It's interesting when they add in the scene in 1955 where he swears she's going to be his wife someday, and they develop it where Biff has gone to extremes and become rich and powerful and corrupt, that he is quite happy to murder George. Of course, he doesn't stay dead in the end, but they probably didn't realise when they first wrote Biff what huge potential there would be for him and his descendant and ancestor in the franchise. Boy, they really do provide all the antagonism and peril in the trilogy.
It's very, very interesting what Biff is capable of and how far he will go in the various timelines. Even in the first one, where they don't make that much of him, he is going to rape Lorraine as a direct result of Marty annoying him so much and Lorraine having GSA, genetic sexual attraction, with him. So he's jealous of Marty, and Marty's caused him to smash up his car, and he's come to the dance, which we decided he wouldn't have done in the original history. Seen Lorraine in her sexy dress, and he has every intention of completely raping her, I think, which he wouldn't have done originally.
That's right. In the original timeline, which we see at the very beginning of the movie, Biff has kept all these repressed urges for Lorraine and all this hatred for and bullying of George, and he hasn't taken it any further than he was doing when they were all in late high school together. It's just festered and carried on and is making everyone's life hell. I said to you this time we watched it, didn't I? Do you think Biff went to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance in the original timeline? Which is very interesting. Because
we couldn't think of any reason why he would.
No,
could we?
If he had done, he would have wanted to try and get George out of the way and cope off with Lorraine, which we know he didn't do in the original timeline. So perhaps originally it kind of went under his radar that they were going together and Lorraine was going to be out of his reach, and there was nothing he could really do about it, obviously, after the dance. It was then that I realised I was going to spend the rest of my life with him, as Lorraine goes in the original timeline, thinking, what a mistake I'd made.
Yes, and in the new 1955, he goes to the dance to take the $300 worth of damage to his car out of Marty's ass, doesn't he? So without Marty, he wouldn't have been there. But then it's so interesting in Back to the Future too. You were talking about how he's been all made worse by all his money and success, from his gambling, from stealing the sports almanac that has all the sports results in 2015, and it made him a murderer, quite happy to shoot George McFly dead. One of the things we noticed, because we always notice something new, usually involving Biff, was to do with when Marty's asking him when and where did you get the almanac and how, and Biff says, he said one more thing, I can't remember the lines exactly, but this is basically it. One day a kid or a crazy wild-eyed scientist may show up asking about that book, and if that ever happens. And then he pulls this gun on Marty. And one day I said, do you think that's really what 2015 Biff, who's grown up out of original 1985 Biff, said to him? Maybe he didn't say shoot them, kill them. Maybe he just said fob them off or something. And then you get to see that scene, and it's not exactly as Biff tells it. He's made it much more succinct and made himself sound much less stupid, which is very interesting. And you hear old Biff saying to young Biff, one day a kid or a crazy wild-eyed scientist will show up asking about that book. Doesn't say may, which I think is quite interesting, because he's pretty sure about that. He knows what's going on, whereas young Biff doesn't, so he doesn't take it that seriously, and in his memory it becomes may show up, and he's saying if that ever happens, and they're walking off and they've locked Marty in the garage not knowing he's there, and you can't at all hear what he says. Even on the DVD, on the big high quality sound telly, they do not want you to pick up exactly what old Biff says to do under those circumstances. It's very interesting. What's also interesting about that scene is that when
we would watch it on the small telly, on the video, and indeed on the small telly. Not, small, but perfectly normal sized television as we would have thought of it in those days. And the DVD as well. You couldn't see the scene wobble when the camera comes into the car with the two versions of Biff in it. However, if you watch the DVD on the big widescreen telly, you can see a slight wobble between 78-year-old Biff and 18-year-old Biff, and that just goes to show what good quality special effects they'd done with that in 1989, because it took more than 20 years worth of ridiculously advanced technology to be able to spot any kind of betrayal in the film that some sort of electrical genius had been going on there. It's quite amazing.
There are such a lot of things that aren't supposed to be seen in that much detail. It really has gone too far, I think. But let's tell everyone the interesting question I asked you once. I said, do you think Biff loves Lorraine?
And I said, oh, that is an interesting question. And I said something like, I think he does in as far as he's capable of loving, and what he sees as love is very possessive, controlling, and perhaps isn't what most people would think of as love. But we know there's the potential in Biff for good, or at least not being a jerk the whole time. So maybe there'd be some version where his parents weren't obviously dead or something, and he'd grown up a little nicer and could love Lorraine a little more, how we might expect.
I was going to say another interesting thing we learned from Back to the Future too is that he lives with his grandma, who's not ever on screen, but we hear her shouting, Biff, where are you going? And she's Thomas F. Wilson too, which is very interesting, and she's obviously horrible to him, and as you say, he doesn't have any parents, for whatever reason. So I think we can blame his upbringing for a lot of the way that he is.
Yes, they don't actually have him dress up as a cranky old 80-year-old woman or something, but he does the voice very well. And Gertrude Tannen is either Buford's daughter or daughter-in-law, but might be interesting if she was actually his daughter and we had some female line and he'd had to kind of abandon her and go to prison. She'd grown up very bitter as well, and had created Biff's dad, who'd also grown up very bitter and died, and it's just a very messed up family, really.
And given that she's Thomas F. Wilson, it's quite likely she's his daughter.
Yes, unless it's from the same school as Lee Thompson playing Maggie.
And I did say to you at one point, Buford's quite possibly a bit of a rapist, even though we don't get it in the film. Maybe that's how Gertrude happened, or certainly it wasn't someone that he was married to or wanted to make a commitment to, so probably left them alone quite a lot.
So a very sad story there in Tannen history for us to fill in, as we just have. Let's talk about the other cast members. Michael J. Fox, we've mentioned before, main character, Marty McFly, and he has to carry the movie, which he does so well. He has to skateboard and be short, which he was able to do in 1985, and relearn in 1989, the skateboarding, that is, not being short, but it actually looks far too old in the sequels, but never mind. And a very big, important thing, of course, was he had to be funny. Do funny faces, reactions when he's looking at George eating the cereal in 1955, and listening to Doc saying things and reacting to Lorraine coming on to him and stuff. And that's why Eric Stoltz was let go from the role, because he's not funny.
Didn't you tell me that they wanted Michael J. Fox, but thought that they couldn't have him?
Yes, he was filming Family Ties all through the day, and then he eventually was tempted to come and film Back to the Future at night, so he never slept.
Yes, and then they had Eric Stoltz, probably thinking, well, he looks kind of like Crispin Glover. And we've talked about him a little bit when we talked about Little Women, in which he plays John Brooke, who's kind and serious, and that's really all he can play as far as we can tell. And if you go online and you type something like Eric Stoltz Back to the Future into Google and do an image search, you'll find comparisons of him doing reactionary stuff and Michael J. Fox, and you'll be able to see that Michael J. Fox is much, much funnier.
He's just not a comedy actor, Eric Stoltz, but watch The Fly 2 and you'll see that he does very effective acting of a different kind.
And we'll probably talk about that someday.
The right actor for the right role, and Michael J. Fox is the right actor for Marty McFly. Of course, they also get him to play Seamus McFly, who is Marty's great-great-grandfather, and Marty's son, Marty Jr., and also Marty's daughter, Marlene. So they didn't get Thomas F. Wilson to dress up as a woman, but they did get Michael J. Fox to dress up as a woman.
He is smaller, so he probably is just naturally more able to be convincing as a woman than Thomas F. Wilson, who's quite large and muscular.
Yeah. Christopher Lloyd as Dr. Emmett Brown. Goodness me, the film needs a mad scientist kind of character who also has a lot of heart, and Christopher Lloyd was the absolute perfect choice for the role. I mean, he's absolutely brilliant with viewers of all ages.
And he can even do his own stunts, can't he? And they have that clock tower climbing around, trying to connect things up sequence in all three films at some point.
And he was over 50, or just coming up to being over 50 when they were filming Back to the Future 3, and it was apparently all him running about on the top of the train. There's great work there. A game old actor he is, and he has, over the past 25 years or so, reprised his role as Doc whenever he's been given the opportunity to do it. You can see him doing all kind of adverts, and he appeared as Doc in the live action segments of the animated series, and he did Doc for Back to the Future The Ride at Universal Studios World Theme Park.
And a bit of a surprise appearance in a film, but I don't want to mention it in case you haven't seen it, and you just have to not know it's coming to find it funny.
We knew it would never be as funny again, but it was absolutely brilliant. It is a film, we could say, that is a western of a sort, spoof western, and you get the Back to the Future 3 reference in it when you're least expecting it. Absolutely brilliant. And of course, Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd appeared on quite a lot of chat shows and things in the US, coming up to 2 years ago now, I suppose, for the 30th anniversary. And they were both looking 30 years older, but they had a lot of fun turning up in the DeLorean and saying, here we are in 2015, then making jokes about what had and hadn't happened like the film predicted.
Flying cars hasn't happened. Obviously, they have a lot of love for the movie, and if you watch the outtakes on the DVD, you see they're having lots and lots of fun. People always talk about chemistry when they're talking about actors, but they normally only bother thinking about it if it's people who are supposed to be having a romance. But it's true that you have to have chemistry with all your co-stars, and those two actors have a lot of chemistry.
That really is the key to the series, isn't it? The chemistry between Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. That is the keystone, and anything else really is a bonus. It's like you were saying last time about Trevor Morgan and Sam Neill having that chemistry that lifts Jurassic Park 3 so much. It really is true. The right chemistry can lift even something that's quite bad, and the wrong chemistry can completely ruin something that might be quite good.
It's so interesting because there's no rhyme or reason to it. Why should Sam Neill and Trevor Morgan have better chemistry than Sam Neill and some other kid? Doesn't make any sense. You can't prove everything scientifically.
No, you can't work it out mathematically. You can't plan for it. You just have to spot it and accept it, like casting directors sometimes do. I've always been really pleased to see Christopher Lloyd pop up in things since Back to the Future, such as the Addams Family movies, Alice in Wonderland from 1999. He turned up in a thing on the CBBC. It was a kind of stage school thing, which obviously wasn't worth watching, but he was being funny in it.
And he was the voice of the mad mole person sort of thing in Hey Arnold the movie, wasn't he?
Yes, so whenever you can see and or hear Christopher Lloyd, do. He's still absolutely fantastic, even in his late 70s. And indeed, why shouldn't you be? We've also mentioned Lee Thompson as Lorraine in various time periods, and Maggie, who's Marty's great-great-grandmother, not related by blood to Lorraine. And she has a sort of innocent look about her that makes her very suitable to be susceptible to all these timeline changes going on around her, and she slips very nicely into whatever she has to do. Alcoholic, depressed Lorraine in original 1985, happy, perky, middle-aged Lorraine in new 1985. 1985. Boob-jobbed, repressed, abused, physically abused Lorraine, who's eventually going to rebel and shoot Biff in Crap 1985.
Also an alcoholic.
Yes, oh yes, back to her alcoholic ways, of course. Aspect of the original character. So she's got to be quite chameleonic, Lee Thompson, in order to reflect all the different timelines she's supposed to be slipping into, because she doesn't do any time travel herself.
She's very good. I'm not sure if you mentioned teenage Lorraine, which she has to do for most of the first film. She's funny, which you have to be for Back to the Future film, so that's good. And I think she's also very good at doing the different versions that you were just mentioning, but clearly being the same character. Slight variations in the voice and the mannerisms, but obviously you can see how one becomes the other.
A crucial seam through the whole thing, Lorraine, and the different versions of her, and what a good job Lee Thompson did with it.
I couldn't tell you any other films or anything that she's in.
She had her own sitcom called Caroline in the City, and I don't think it lasted very long. So I think the Back to the Future films will come out as her, whatever the film version of a magnum opus, as her defining role, and I suppose that's true of all the actors in the trilogy, really. Crispin Glover, as we mentioned, didn't come back for the sequels, which is a blessing in disguise, but like Lee Thompson in the first film, he has to be quite chameleonic and play three rather different versions of the same character, and he certainly plays that part very well.
I think original 1985 George and 1955 George are more similar than the Lorraines.
Yes, they are in many ways.
Being in the marriage hasn't sort of affected him as much as it has Lorraine, I suppose that's the reason.
Yes, he's still in denial about everything, how bad his life is, how bad his marriage is, how bad his relationship with Biff is.
Yes, and he's got Lorraine, which is whom he's very happy to have, but Lorraine, you feel, could have sort of done a bit better.
Yeah, and by 1985 original, she really knows it, and she is drinking herself and smoking herself and depressing herself into an early grave there. So we come out at the end of Back to the Future with the new 1985 feeling very upbeat about the whole thing, which is another kind of undermined feeling in the sequels if you really think about it.
And the thing that we enjoyed, I think it's relevant now, is when they're finding out that Marty's interfered with their first meeting and Doc's saying you've got to get them together, you've got to set them on a date. What do they like to do together? You're parents, you must know them. What do they like to do together? And Marty goes, nothing.
Yes, and I think we both thought, yes, that's what we would say if asked what do parents like to do together. Nothing. Not see each other. That's what they like to do.
But then in improved 1985, where George has gone on this journey and changed and they actually like each other, you find out that they like doing golf together. But Marty didn't know that.
Yes,
originally.
That's why he's so surprised and yet pleased. And I don't think he should really be used enough to the new timeline yet to come back at the end of Back to the Future 3 and see that alternate new 1985 again and say, thank God you guys are all back to normal.
Yes.
He should really be still thinking of normal as the original 1985. What he means is, thank God you guys are all back to the better version of 1985 that I made by going back to 1955.
Yes, well, that's what you want, isn't it?
Yes, and I guess you want to say normal because you don't want to, put in spoilers for the original film. Although, to watch them out of sequence would be awfully stupid. Those are the main cast members, but there's a lot of supporting actors who play such a crucial part in bringing the characters in different timelines, or the same characters in different timelines sometimes, to life. I think the first one you would think of would be James Tolkien, of Masters of the Universe movie fame, as Mr. Strickland.
Yes.
And Marshall Strickland, who I mentioned earlier.
That's right. He's being Marty's teacher, getting on his case at school in 1985, and then you see that he was doing the exact same thing to George and everyone, really, in 1955. I don't think he really likes being a teacher. He doesn't really like any of the students.
I think Marshall Strickland's son, I read, is supposed to be Mr. Strickland's father.
That makes sense.
Yes, I mean, if Mr. Strickland is supposed to be 35 in 1955, and he was born then in 1920, and Marshall Strickland's son is, say, 10 in 1885. So he'd be quite old father for Mr. Strickland, wouldn't he? But
He'd be a young grandfather, though.
yes, he would be a young grandfather. I think I read on some "This is explaining how it all fits together" website, which there are quite a few of, that Mr. Strickland was the youngest of about 4 brothers, and so Marshall Strickland's son was his dad, and he was quite an old dad for him, but not necessarily for his oldest brother, which makes a certain amount of sense.
Yes, that's fine. I think my favourite thing that Mr. Strickland does, though, is be in Alternate 1985, telling Marty the school's burnt down, and he pulls his gun on him, saying, "So you're the stinking bum who's been stealing my newspapers," when Marty's looking at the date and all that kind of stuff. And you were talking earlier, we were, about Michael J. Fox's brilliant comedy, and one of my favourite things is when Mr. Strickland's putting this gun on him and he doesn't recognise him, and Marty's confusion and terror going, "Oh, please, Mr. Strickland, don't tell me from school." It's really funny.
Eric Stoltz would never have done that.
And then along comes Mr. Drive-By Shooter to kill Mr. Strickland, and then he's running after them with his gun going, "Slackers!" And he's been calling everybody a slacker at school. It's a running gag. It's very well judged.
I found it interesting there how you said you're the stinking bum, which is the dub of
Oh, is it?
better language that we had on the video we recorded off the telly. When you watch it on the DVD, it's son of a bitch instead.
Ah, yeah, I forgot.
They do have some funny ones. Like Biff in 1955 is reading the almanac and he's seeing the sports results are right, and he goes, "Son of a bitch," and then they dub it over with, "They're all right." And we're like, yes, I think Son of a Bitch is a bit more in character for Biff, but we still get what he's saying.
Of course, in the first film, when the terrorists are coming to kill everybody at Twin Pine Mall, Marty goes around saying "holy cheese" a lot on our video version. Yes, that's good too. Terror and bewilderment done really quite comically, but also is very emotional when Doc gets shot by them.
Who do you think? The Libyans! Another supporting actor is Billy Zane from Titanic, and he does a lot of good background work in 1 and 2, particularly a line we love, and our mother used to love this, but the only bit you like, how the heck he changes clothes so fast.
When there's 2 versions of Marty in 1955.
You've got to understand the whole concept of the film and how there's 2 versions of the same Marty in the same day in 1955, and they've just seen one chased him into the gym and then they see the other up on the stage, and it appears to them he changes clothes so fast.
Yes, I think we noticed that Billy Zane doesn't actually have any lines in the first one, didn't we?
It's all silent background work. He's one of Biff's goons, as you may have worked out.
Yes, but then in the second one he has that line, and I think in Alternate 1985, being middle-aged, he says something when they're finding Marty and hitting him on the head and stuff.
I think he says that we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
That's right, so they give him a couple of things to say. They must have noticed his potential.
Yeah. Mary Steenburgen plays Clara Clayton in Back to the Future 3. When I first watched it, I sort of resented her presence a bit. Oh, stupid woman screwing everything up. But it allows Christopher Lloyd to do some great acting work and some very emotional stuff. I do like the scene between them where they talk about the moon and Jules Verne and stuff.
Yes, you could look at it as screwing everything up, but on the other hand, that needs to happen for there to be much of a plot, doesn't there?
That's right, and it makes a very happy ending for Doc with his children in the end.
And it provides child characters for the cartoon series.
Indeed it does. Yeah, Back to the Future 3 without the Clara plot and just the Buford stuff, but it wouldn't have as many dimensions. It probably wouldn't be as good.
And why would Doc drink whiskey and pass out and make an exciting climax when they're going to have to go and catch the train, hijack the train, if he hadn't had to split up with Clara?
Yes, all very nicely knitted together. We mentioned Mark McClure as Dave McFly, who does what he needs to do, just like he does in the 5 Superman/Girl movies. And the sister, Linda McFly, was played by Wendy Jo Sperber, who died of cancer a few years ago, very sadly. And she wasn't in the second one, even in a deleted scene, because she was pregnant at the time, which is fair enough. But it's nice to see those two, back at the end of the third anyway, and things are back to normal as they should be in 1985 version 2.
I did remark a little bit rudely, I suppose, that because she's been recently pregnant, she does look a little different. And I remarked that she looks less like original Linda than the man who stands in the background being George looks like Crispin Glover.
Jeffrey Wiseman is his name.
They did get a good look-alike, and he does have aging makeup and say some lines in 2015 when he doesn't need to look like George as we've seen him before. And also they put him upside down, don't they, so that we won't notice.
Yes, felt and braces there.
We noticed as well, speaking of Dave, didn't we, that the ideology of the film was a bit snooty about Dave's ideal scenario. In original 1985 he works in Burger King, and in ideal 1985 he wears a suit to the office. But what's wrong with working in Burger King? He could climb the ladder and become Burger King manager and stuff like that if he wanted to.
Bit of cold feet mentality there, unfortunately.
Yes, ITV shows what Jake's referring to, job snobbery. But somebody's got to work in Burger King, somebody's got to drive a taxi.
The other main character, I suppose, who we have mentioned before, is Jennifer Parker, Marty's girlfriend, and she's played by an actress called Claudia Wells in the first film. There's this big thing, isn't there, where Marty's planning to take her up to the lake, but he's pretending to Lorraine that he's going up there with the guys, because she doesn't approve of that sort of thing in the original timeline, but it turns out she used to, and she's probably kind of jealous of it now. And I was saying to you this time, wasn't I? I think Marty, this weekend means so much to him because he's planning to finally slip her the trouser snake.
Yes, I always thought talking about sleeping bags and being under the stars, he was planning on doing that sort of thing with her. I never really thought about how perhaps it was going to be the first time, which you pointed out to me.
I think that's why it was quite such a big thing to him, and quite such a big crux point in his life that they chose to set the film in. So there's something to spot under the surface and read into it in that way if you choose to do so. Now, unfortunately, Claudia Wells was, I gather, very ill when they were making Back to the Future 2 and 3. Evidently she did recover and is still alive according to Wikipedia. But unfortunately they had to recast the role for 2 and 3. And it's interesting to spot some of the changes that they make, the little changes to what was the closing scene of Back to the Future and becomes the opening scene of Back to the Future 2. They record with Elizabeth Shue in the role of Jennifer instead of Claudia Wells. Elizabeth Shue does a lot more over-the-top reacting to Doc turning up in the time machine and saying we're going to the future now than Claudia Wells did. And I always thought Claudia Wells' version of that was better, and Elizabeth Shue's over-the-top was rather distracting. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I used to think maybe you would react a bit more if someone was coming along saying, gotta come back with me. Back where? Back to the future.
There is that.
But then maybe you wouldn't, because you wouldn't really take it in and take it seriously, would you? You probably would just sort of look a bit puzzled like Claudia Wells did, so I guess she was better.
And there's a couple of other interesting changes to that scene, isn't there? Marty, do we become assholes or something? And in the original version, Doc's like, oh, no, you and Jennifer, you have a lovely time. And then in the new one, he's like, what am I going to say? I don't want to tell him that his life's completely screwed up. So he's like, no, you and Jennifer both turn out fine. Because that's what they've decided for the new movie. But I have read how Bob and Robert, the creators, have said if we knew we were going to come back to a sequel, if we thought there was any chance, because that ending going off to where there are no roads to the future to sort out your kids was written as just a final joke for the film and wasn't originally planned to go anywhere. They said if that had been planned to spawn a sequel and we knew there was any chance that it was going to be that successful and do that, we would not have put Jennifer in the time machine. And you can tell that from the sequels. They hate having her there. They have to come up with convoluted stuff to do with her in the future and reasons why Doc has brought her. I had to do something. She saw the time machine. Yeah, whatever. And then she gets just dumped in the alley. There's absolutely no reason to take her out of the DeLorean.
Just leave her in the DeLorean.
And then she spends most of the two films in the porch swing waiting to be woken up at the end of Back to the Future 3.
Although I do quite like the sequence. They were sort of forced to make it because she was there, but I think it turned out very well. Where she's in the house and she can't leave because there are no doorknobs and she doesn't know that you have to exit using your thumbprint. And she's hiding from her future family. And I think she does that very well. I think she's quite comedic with it, hiding in the cupboard and stuff. And then the bit that I do think is quite effective is where she has the opportunity to leave. Doc's come to help her and she's trying to sneak out, and then she hears Marty playing his guitar and he can't do it properly, and she knows Marty to be a very proficient guitar player, so she's stopping and thinking, what on earth is Marty doing playing the guitar badly? Something must be wrong, and she's forgotten her own immediate problems and trying to escape, so that shows you something about the relationship between them, I think.
Yeah, and it's very satisfying. I remember thinking this the first time I watched Back to the Future 3, where they do come back to that at the very end of Back to the Future 3. Again, it's another sign that it's really one whole movie, 2 and 3. And she takes out her "you're fired" note, and it erases, and she's like, future's going to be okay then. So yes, they do make some good use of Jennifer, but she's obviously become something of a nuisance in places to the plot and the logistics of the movie. Another thing about Jennifer is that it's a running gag that she and Marty always get interrupted when they're about to kiss, which first happens in the first movie. I suppose they have the ultimate interruption when Marty's trying to consummate their relationship, which is the whole day gets completely ruined by time travel happening all over it. And you can see in the coming up in Back to the Future 3 sequence, which is at the end of Back to the Future 2, that originally Marty and Jennifer were supposed to actually get round to kissing on the porch to signify, this is the end of the movie. Marty and Jennifer have finally got to kiss. They're not going to have more interruptions. Everything's going to be okay. They don't actually put that in the final cut, which I can see why they took it out for ease of transition from the porch scene to Marty taking Jennifer off to have the automobile accident, or not have the automobile accident. But I do think it's a shame that didn't make it in the end. So yes, a missed opportunity there to make the best of Jennifer, I think, and get that kiss in. I mean, Elizabeth, she was okay, isn't she? But shame it couldn't be Claudia Wells. A, because she started, and B, because she didn't overreact in that scene. But then, maybe she wouldn't have been as good at that stuff you were talking about, of comedically running around the house.
I can't imagine her in the house. I mean, you just don't know how she would have done it. Maybe she would have been good at it, but I think Elizabeth Shue was good at it. I like the bit where Marty Jr.'s stumbling around, he's sort of clumsy and in his own world, and he's going, "Hey Mom, nice pants." She's got these flowery leggings on. She's like, "Mom?"
Yeah, so they certainly do all play their part and should be proud of their work in the movies, definitely. As should Freddy the dog as Einstein, and the other dog whose name I can't remember as Copernicus. Doc's 2 dogs from the different time periods, and that really is all the main characters and actors. So I think Back to the Future trilogy will always be a favourite for us, and it's definitely something that anyone of any age can get into and find something to enjoy there. It's highly recommended around these parts. Not surprising that an animated series was spawned from it. As I say, I think all the messing about time travelling in Back to the Future 2 would make people think, children ought to like this sort of thing, let's make a cartoon series out of it. And I do remember coming across it and not really watching it properly, but being interested that it was there.
Me too.
On weekend mornings on Channel 4. And I did notice and be glad to see that Christopher Lloyd was there as the kind of presenter to welcome you to the show and tell you about different bits of science as Doc Brown, and he adds a lot to it. He doesn't do the voice of Doc in the animated segments. He obviously wasn't available that extensively, but Dan Castellaneta does a fairly good Christopher Lloyd impression there. And also from the films, you've got Thomas F. Wilson, who also likes to pop up as Biff wherever he can, voicing Biff and also all the Tannen ancestors and descendants that you meet in all the time travel. And that's the thing about the animated series. You can't really put it in the same continuity as the film series.
For one thing, in the film, the DeLorean gets run over by a train at the end.
It's true, although they do go to the trouble of calling it the New DeLorean in the first episode of the cartoon series.
All that, we have to destroy it and then they build another one.
That's the thing. The characters are not in the right place emotionally and practically that they are at the end of Back to the Future. They've had this whole big journey to get to. So you don't want to get to the end of Back to the Future 3 and think, oh, that was very good character journeys, and then abandon them thinking, oh, cartoons in the same continuity. Because it isn't. It's a fun cartoon series based on the films, and Marty will do things like, hey, don't call me a puss, which is chicken. And I saw that in the animated series and thought, yes, Marty from the films wouldn't be saying that, but they've taken it from the films to make this fun cartoon series, so that's fine.
That sort of thing really bothers some people who go on the internet and complain about it, but I mean, it's not a fact, it's an opinion, but in a sense, the fact is, you can never fully marry together and reconcile a cartoon series based on a film with the film.
In many ways, it is just better not to worry about it and make the cartoon its own thing. The other voice actor from the show is Mary Steenburgen, who voices Clara in the series, and it really centres around Doc and Clara, and of course Jules and Vern, who appear in Back to the Future 3 so briefly, but in many ways they really do carry the cartoon series, which makes a lot of sense because you're going to want the young kid characters to be your protagonists in the cartoon series, aren't you?
I remember it as being mostly about Vern, who I seem to remember they make the more relatable kid, and Jules is a sort of nerdy science guy like his dad.
That's it, yes. They try and water it down a bit like that for the young audience, which is fair enough.
Yeah, that's okay.
And you see that Vern is really a reincarnation of Clara's mother, who you meet in one of the episodes.
I didn't know that.
That's who he's most like in his family, and indeed, why shouldn't it be so? But yes,
that's quite interesting.
Jules is very like Doc. I bought quite a few episodes of the cartoon series when I was very into Back to the Future and interested in seeing the cartoon and having some of it.
Had you recently got your DVD present?
Yes, I think so. And they're on American VHSs. And I did share the experience of watching some of those with you, didn't I? And
yeah.
I think you quite enjoyed it.
I did quite enjoy it at the time. I've mostly forgotten it now. It's the sort of thing you quite like when you're watching it, but you don't really remember.
Yeah, that is really what the cartoon is like. It's very entertaining. There's lots of time jumping around and fun and meeting interesting people like Benjamin Franklin and Ben-Hur. But it's not the sort of cartoon like The Mysterious Cities of Gold where you come away feeling like you understand life better afterwards.
And Extreme Ghostbusters,
yes.
Blazing Dragons, things like that.
Things like that. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of depth, but it is a tremendous amount of fun. It does have a lot of time travel. And as a children's cartoon, I can see that it is very enjoyable. It has 2 seasons, and I think from what I've seen, the second one isn't quite as good. It doesn't always have time travel, the second season, which I think is a bit stupid. There's this one where Jules grows a money tree, which makes him popular, and then he discovers that money can't buy you real friendship, and it's quite well done, and it's quite good to have a proper duel there to make it an interesting character, but it's disappointing it's not about time travel.
It's not a good idea to make episodes where you don't have the USP.
The USP, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, you get a couple of those in season 2. Another one is where Vern accidentally brings the character out of the video game, which is more sci-fi in a different way than time travel than you should have on a time travel based show, I think.
No, I can see why they didn't make any more after that if they had run out of ideas for actually using time travel.
It's quite an amusing episode, which is entitled Brave Lord and Demon Monstrux. And Brave Lord is this character that Vern accidentally brings out of the computer game. And he's kind of like He-Man. He looks like He-Man, and he talks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's very self-obsessed and amusing. Not now, Vernmeister, I am lubing my pecs. It's an amusing episode, but it's not really a time travel episode. Marcy and Jennifer do feature in the series, and Marcy's done by David Kaufman, Danny Phantom, who makes a career of voicing Michael J. Fox. Well, he did it in the Stuart Little cartoon series anyway.
Danny Phantom is Michael J. Fox.
No, and Jennifer's the other thing that Kathy Cavadini does, actually. We were talking about her yesterday. I was saying she was Blossom on the Powerpuff Girls originally, and she was Tanya Mousewitz in Fireball Goes West and the Fireball cartoon series. We don't have a podcast about that.
Maybe not.
But the voice work, anyway, from all those people is very good in it. And I always do think when they have these young characters in the cartoons that are going to carry the cartoon, I do like, as in the Mysterious Cities of Gold, hearing the genuine young voices creating the characters rather than grown-ups doing terribly good child voices but not doing them very childlike. And I did think Jules and Vern were both quite well done, very well done at times. Jules' actor was called Josh Wiener, and then he changed it to Keaton because nobody wants to be called Wiener.
No.
And he voiced young Hercules in the Disney Hercules movie as well, which is quite interesting.
Quite interesting.
And Vern was done by someone called Troy Davidson, and he doesn't appear to have any other acting credits, but I think he carries a lot of episodes with his young, enthusiastic, confrontational Vern performance, which he does very well indeed. So that's another plus for the cartoon series, in my opinion. I think Jules and Vern are well done in their characters and in their voice work and do a good job carrying the series, or a lot of episodes of the series. And on the whole, I do enjoy it, and sometimes I think I should watch the videos of it again, because I haven't watched them for quite some years. But perhaps in 2017's update podcast, I'll let you know if I've watched those again. Or have you seen any of them? We have anything else to say about it. And speaking of update podcast, that is going to be our next release. You can join us on New Year's Eve, when we'll be sharing with you a few little update snippets, some little loose ends that were left hanging in some of our earlier podcasts this year, which might be slightly interesting. And we'll also tell you our plans for the Olden Days podcast in 2017. There are plans, they're a little different to the 2016 plan.
Just a little.
And you will also learn then from Rosie what our first podcast of 2017 will be about. So join us again on, as I say, New Year's Eve. For that, all will be revealed. Until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.